Ladies and gentlemen, this is Daniel Witek once again on the 28th of August 2016. I thought about this very carefully during the day since I made my previous video recording, and I feel that it's necessary since Mr. Brown decided within 2 days of being informed that I had lodged a formal complaint against him for malpractice with the Erie County Bar Association Grievance Committee. Beg your pardon, I'm very tired. And that he decided that I had to be put away, to be put in a psychiatric facility, so I could not face court, so I could not have my day in court, so I could not be defended properly. And that as of tomorrow morning, the 29th of August, I will have no voice. But there are certain things that you must know. These things which are provable through audio tape recordings between myself and Cynthia Van Ness, and through multiple witnesses. Cynthia Van Ness had been the director of the Buffalo History Museum archive for 6 or 7 years at the time that she requested me to act in a pro bono capacity, going through some papers and documents and so forth to do with the Goodyear family and other collections. But she is well aware of the fact that with my experience as a museum consultant and as a fine art dealer, that I was observing while I was there, and I saw 3-inch stacks of valuable photographs, file folders filled with them, with no inventory, not even a number on the front of a folder as to how many photographs were in the folder. Some of them might have been worth 50 cents at a flea market. Some I know for a fact were worth hundreds or a few $1,000s, and they were being handed out in 3-inch stacks. There you are, let me know when you want some more. There's no possible way for Cynthia Van Ness or any other employee to know exactly what they were being handed back. On another occasion, when a historical society in Virginia inquired of the Buffalo History Museum some information from a valuable cache of Thomas Jefferson letters owned by the Buffalo History Museum. I have no idea. I don't normally deal in autographs. The autographs I had for sale, I had acquired in the 1990s. They had been in storage from 1998 to 2011, and I have witnesses, of course, museum officials, not at the Buffalo History Museum, but elsewhere, who saw them in 2011. So clearly, they were not in possession of the Buffalo History Museum when I did my pro bono service in 2013. They know it's an impossibility. However, when this inquiry came, Ms. Van Ness went and found some letters of Thomas Jefferson and asked me for assistance regarding the franking, the postage essentially, on these letters from the late 18th and early 19th century of Thomas Jefferson to a man in rural Western New York. What shocked me was, this was on a Wednesday, and it was observed by other volunteers and staff, patrons, that when we were done with this, she put this small, thin file of very valuable Thomas Jefferson letters on the top of a book cart. On the top of the cover, it said the letters of Thomas Jefferson to a particular person, and left them there in an area where the public could have taken it at any time. This is how she was running the archive for the 6 or 7 years prior to my pro bono service. What I was shocked to find was that when I returned to the archive on Saturday to do further pro bono service, this file of Jefferson letters was still sitting on top of a book cart where absolutely anyone could have taken them. Many people milled around in there with large, heavy coats, didn't check their bags right away, and unlike me, who observed flawless museum security protocol and always was offered my property for search and so forth when I would leave the building, there were all sorts of people walking around with coats and bags and so forth, and this could have been taken at any time. I was shocked to see that she just left them sitting there in a public area from Wednesday to Saturday, or I should say at least Wednesday to Saturday. When I was working with some of the Goodyear material, of course I had no idea what she was going to ask me to look at. Books, lists of inventory, I had no idea what it might be. She had placed 3 large file boxes of original autographic material on a table where I was sitting just several feet, 5, 6, 7 feet from another volunteer, and perhaps 10 feet from the workstation of Ms. Van Ness. And I was shocked when I opened these boxes. There were hundreds of original autographic letters. Now, for her to place so much material on the table, knowing full well that well, Ms. Van Ness said that 40 years ago there were 6 staff in the archive, now there are only 1.5. So imagine people looking at microfilm, people looking at maps, people making inquiries, the telephone ringing, and knowing very well that there was no way to protect our heritage properly. Instead of doing what was necessary to protect it, which is very easy and doesn't involve the expense of money, all of this madness was going on during her tenure for the 7 years prior to the instigation of this case. What completely flabbergasted me was that on occasions when I told Miss Van Ness I would not be back in the archive for perhaps a week, so those file boxes of original valuable material could be put in a secure area. There are witnesses, there's audio tape conversations of Ms. Van Ness and I discussing this. She left these 3 large file boxes filled with original material on the table, no locks, no security of any kind, and just left them there. We're talking about something like maybe 16 inches deep of files. Imagine how many pages there are in a 16 deep section of filing, of original files and documents, some of very little financial value, some fabulously valuable, and she left them there for over a week, knowing full well I would not be coming to work with them, even when I requested that they should be moved 8 feet perhaps into the employees only area. At the beginning of 2015, I was put in contact with a Paula Rosner, who was a former director of the regional ACLU. A mutual acquaintance said that I should speak with her. When I met with her in January of 2015, she told me that approximately 15 years prior to that time, she had been requested by what was then the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society if she would offer some pro bono service looking at some papers and documents and books to assist them from her area of expertise. She told me that while she was in the archive, and this is around the year 2000, years before the tenure of Cynthia Van Ness, but this tells you what was going on, there were stacks of material on the carpeting on the floors. There were stacks on the tables where people that were working with materials, you couldn't even tell what went with who, and it would have been very easy, even for an honest person, to take something from someone else's materials and then commingle it and be misfiled, and it could be 50 years before it's found again. Now this, over the last 15 years, on top of these investigations in the early 1980s that only scratched the surface, and the Erie County Controller in the early 1980s, seeing what a shambles the History Museum was, did the Erie County Controller's office a year or 2 or 5 years later go back to see if the situation had been ameliorated, if certain precautions had been taken? No. And the Erie County executive at the time, Elfrida Sleminski, served in office for nearly another decade after the scandals of the early 1980s. The Honorable Henry Nowak, who was Erie County Controller from the mid-60s to the mid-70s and later a Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society board member, knew of the internal thefts by the Curator of Manuscripts in 1968, and so on and so on. So there is a history of all of these extraordinary accomplished people, lawyers, bankers, judges, congressmen, knowing for at least 48 years or 45 years prior to the case against me that there was that there were terrible problems in the place, and they also knew that there were things that are supposed to be in the collection, but which are not. Things which were sold into public domain decades ago. And because of the reputations and importance of the dozens of important Western New Yorkers who will be embarrassed and possibly worse because of all of this, they're trying to bury me. I offered the museum in 2013 at the instigation of this case, if they could prove, I've had the documents in dispute since the 1990s, if they could prove that anything that I had ever been in the collection of the museum, even if it was in 1965 and somehow someone took it at the time and put it on the open market, I would happily return it to them. If they could show me that any single item had ever actually been in the building in the museum collection, and they could not. I said that I would be, and the reason that this case was not dropped, many people have told me, is because if they were to drop this case now, I could sue the museum for liability, I could sue the board members, I could sue Cynthia Van Ness, because this is a case without evidence. And the fact that there is all of this evidence, all of this proof of the unbelievable negligence and incompetence that has gone on in this institution for the last half century and more. Cynthia Van Ness told me herself that all of the accession documents, the documents which show where donations came from to the archive, from 1945 to 1965, are missing. This includes the critical Goodyear donation period. Now, this means thousands of pages relating to every donation made to the archive for a 20-year period, and according to Cynthia Van Ness, none of it can be located. Now, someone cannot simply say that because I'm selling something by a particular author, that if they have things by the same author in their collection, it was one of the reasons, of course, where she asked me to give my assistance. No one can say that simply because I had a letter by so-and-so and they have letters by so-and-so, well, we don't know and we can't prove we ever had it, but somehow it must be ours. Miss Van Ness was completely incompetent in this. When she knew what she'd be pushing in front of me, unlike myself, I had no way to know, she should have asked me to bring in the materials I was selling. She should have photocopied all of them, initialed them, so she could say, before we have you doing any of this, Daniel, we need to make absolutely certain that it's clear that what you are selling is your property and you were doing this prior to your service to the museum. But she did no such thing. Ladies and gentlemen, please take an active interest in the welfare of the Buffalo History Museum and Buffalo History Museum Archive. It is a scandal what has gone on there, and what has been allowed to be perpetuated by one generation of influential Western New Yorkers, fathers and sons, one to the other, literally now for decades. Thank you for your attention.